guys, Annabelle here from Horizon Cosplay, and today we're going to be talking about a costume I made based on one of my favourite childhood movies, Barbie, Swan Lake. So this adventure started one afternoon when I went out with a friend to a pub. One of the few times I've actually ever done that, but I can highly recommend. We were talking about various cosplays we had planned, and she mentioned that her new project that she was starting on was Odette from Barbie Swan Lake. The feather dress, of course, and that dress has to be my dream cosplay, though it's one I want to get a bit more experience for before I attempt to tackle it myself. However, it was suggested that as she was cosplaying Odette, it might be nice if I made a Fairy Queen costume to go along with her, and then we could cosplay as a pair together. And I loved this idea. All my favourite Barbie movies are the ballets, and I thought this would be a really good place to start with learning how to make ballet dresses. Also guys, let me know in the comments down below what your favourite Barbie movie is. I have so many costumes from her various films that I really want to make, but it's so hard to choose just one to put on my list. Anyway, feeling inspired, I went fabric shopping and raided the clearance section of Spotlight for a few things, though we'll go into just what fabrics I used in a minute. I then rummaged through the available patterns and came across McCall's 7615. Deciding that that would be the perfect pattern, I brought it and went home to start experimenting. I decided not to make a mock-up of the skirt, deciding that so long as the waistband fit, the rest of it would be no problem. However, the bodice was a different story, and even the smallest size did not fit me. The whole thing was just way too big. Too big around the waist, too big around the boobs. It was just a nightmare, really. So I traced it out onto scrap paper and started trying to adjust the pattern so that it would fit to my body. In the end, I actually just removed the two back panels of the corset, which worked, though it's also something I wouldn't necessarily advise if you guys want to try this yourself. However, one thing all this kerfuffle did do was totally make me forget that I was supposed to adjust the neckline on the top before starting to cut everything out. In the film, the Fairy Queen has a straight neckline. Here you can see we clearly have a sweetheart neckline, I think you'd describe it. Either way, it's curved, has a point in the middle, and is certainly not what I was originally aiming for. Of course though, I only noticed this difference when I was looking at reference pictures for her makeup the day before we were about to have a photo shoot with this outfit. And unfortunately by then, I couldn't exactly go back and fix it. The other thing I didn't do with this top is the layering effect that we see on her dress. I actually did try to do this originally, but it ended up so thick and heavy, and no matter how I put it on, it just ended up looking like a giant square, which wasn't very pleasant, so I decided just to leave it out and use my artistic license to create this look. When it came to making this outfit, the first thing I knew I wanted to do was layer various different fabrics to create a look that I was really happy with. Taking some scraps of several different fabrics I had in my collection, I mixed and matched them until I was happy with the final effect. As all my costumes seem to be, this bodice is lined with an old bedsheet. The next layer, which you can actually see from the outside, is actually a purple quilting cotton, from the same collection as the gold quilting cotton I used in my Kyoshi Warrior and Dai Li cosplays and the red in my Juliet cosplays. Funny story with this one is that I actually brought the purple quilting cotton for another project completely. However, the fabric I originally had in mind to use as the base layer for this ended up being so light and pink that it really just didn't look good, which is why I decided to end up using this quilting cotton instead. I do actually still have that pink fabric somewhere. I'm not sure, quite honestly, what I'm ever going to do with it. The next layer of the bodice is the most wonderful purple lace. After finishing this costume, I actually went back to Spotlight, and luckily it was on clearance. I brought the exact same lace in pink so that I could use it in my Hannah Alexander Poison Ivy costume. What can I say? I just loved it so much that I just had to use it again. And the last layer that we have on the bodice is an iridescent purple organza. I really hoped that this layer would give the whole outfit a bit of a glow, shimmery look. After all, she is supposed to be a fairy, and I can honestly say that the effect is exactly what I was aiming for, something that doesn't often happen. Now, I did bind the top of the bodice with just this row of cotton. I did this for two reasons: one, to neaten up all the raw edges, and two, because you can clearly see in the movie that she does have a line of a different fabric along the top of her bodice, which actually also features quite heavily in the dolls that were made of her. I then inserted grommets onto the back of the dress, putting them on a small cotton panel rather than the heavily layered lace organza cotton layers underneath for two reasons. Firstly, because the organza frayed like fuck and it was really unpleasant to work with, and I did not want to go putting holes in that. And secondly, so that the hangover underneath would act as a bit of a modesty panel. I did actually make a full modesty panel for this, but it ended up being so close to me that I didn't end up using it. Once all the grommets were in place, I actually did hand stitch over the top of them, and I really liked this effect. It was the first time I'd actually used this technique. However, since then, I think I've hand stitched every grommet I've ever done since. So you know how the towels come folded with a nice piece of ribbon tied around them? Yeah, that ribbon is currently lacing up the back of my corset, and I can honestly say it has to be some of the strongest ribbon I've ever worked with. Definitely no complaints on function, and I do love to recycle. Oh, and the boning inside the corset is just normal plastic boning. At the time, I had so many upcoming projects that were requiring boning, I actually brought an entire reel, about 10 meters of it, before getting even more plastic boning in that van hole I unpacked a few months ago. So I'm definitely not running out of that anytime soon. Maybe when I eventually do, I might try using another type of boning, like either synthetic whalebone, steel, or maybe just stronger plastic boning. I don't know, something. Let me know if you have any suggestions. I also decided to add some decorative stitches of flowers on the bodice, pretty much just because I could. I decided to use a blue thread for this to try and make those flowers stand out more, which both did and didn't work. On one hand, the embroidery in general just really isn't that noticeable. On the other hand, up close, the blue does stand out, and it is a very pretty pattern that I do think adds to the aesthetic of the look. The skirt was my next project, and to be honest, it was really easy. First step was simply cutting out a waistband shape of some quilting cotton, putting some iron-on interfacing underneath, and attaching some Velcro at the back for it to do up with. And then came to adding all these lovely layers. Now, the first thing I will say is that the first and second layers of the skirt are put way too far apart. Because of this, it means the top layers are too close together, which unfortunately does interfere slightly with the silhouette I was aiming for, which is a little bit of a disappointment, but also a very big learning curve for me. I will also say that I did alter the pattern slightly here, considering that the pattern did only call for 2 original layers and not the 4 that I ended up putting on. And just so you guys know, all the layers are basically giant long rectangles that have been gathered at the waistline, then sealed at the back using a French seam. So the first layer of skirt is a stiffened tulle. I did, by the way, leave all my tulle to have raw edges, something that I'm still a bit 50-50 on. On one hand, hemming them really isn't necessary, but on the other hand, I think aesthetically I'm definitely going to put some ribbon around there next time. Anyway, I figured by putting the stiffened tulle right at the bottom, it would help to support the skirt and encourage it to keep its shape. I also figured, as the other layers are a lot lighter and have a lot more movement to them, that by putting the stiffest layer underneath, it would give the skirt a better flow, shall we say. The second layer is a much lighter tulle, though in pretty much the same colour. I was actually really confused when I first brought this, because though the packet definitely said tulle on it, I've got to be honest, it's weirdly stretchy, which the other layer definitely isn't. To be honest, it's almost like some kind of netting or tights, so either this one was just super cheap, or maybe it was just made really cheaply, or maybe I brought the wrong thing. I'm really not sure. Either way, I'm not going to complain about it too much because it does do the job I wanted it to. It has the movement I was aiming for while still adding to the volume of the overall skirt. Though I will say I think it's lucky that we didn't sew anything onto this, otherwise we might have run into some problems. The third layer is this lace, which is incredibly lovely but also a little bit heavy. It certainly weighed the skirt down a little bit when I first put it on. However, I really wanted to include it just because of how it ties in with the bodice. And also because honestly, just feeling this lace is one of the loveliest fabrics I've ever worked with. Not to mention the lovely movement it has when you move around in this dress. And this last layer of iridescent organza is really where I came undone and made what's probably the biggest mistake in the entire skirt. So one thing I didn't notice when I was sewing the bodice together, because I was sandwiching all the layers together, stitching around the outside so that it basically became one piece of fabric, is that this organza really does fray like a bitch. It's incredibly unpleasant to work with. My original plan when it came to this layer of skirt had actually been to create large leaf shapes that I could then drape around, very similar to the effect that she has on the Barbie doll. However, upon cutting out these leaf shapes, I soon found that they were fraying left, right and centre, and before I knew it, all my fabric was ruined. Even a simple straight stitch would just tear the fabric apart to such a level that it was incredibly, unsavable really. Potentially I could have fixed this by either adjusting the settings on my sewing machine, adding some fabric glue as I was cutting things out. I just don't really know. There was something going on there that I really didn't like, and I also really didn't appreciate, and my solution was to scrap the leaf idea, go out, buy more fabric, as luckily I had brought this from a local shop that was just up the road from me, and it also wasn't too expensive, and simply make a giant rectangle that I could put around the skirt. However, this is also where I came undone. As I mentioned, it frayed a terrible amount, which meant that it had to be hemmed. But my hemming techniques that I was trying to use just weren't working. By the time I'd managed to do a kind of neat rolled hem, I'd actually wasted over half my fabric, and this section that we've got on the dress right now was the only piece that was good enough to actually, well, put it on the dress. Ideally, I would have had double the amount of fabric on the top layer of skirt, and the one bad thing about this, especially considering how poofy all the underlayers are, is that when you walk, you definitely feel the restriction of that outside hem. It's a little bit unfortunate, however, just looking at it, it still gives the effect I was looking for, so overall, I suppose I've got to be happy with the results. I have to admit, this was so frustrating that the first time I wore it, I did nearly take a pair of scissors and just cut that whole top layer off. However, we'll see how it looks like in the photos, as I still haven't gotten them back yet, though I am looking forward to seeing them. Anyway, on to the accessories. With this dress, I normally wear a pair of pink or skin-coloured tights, depending on my mood. I should also wear a pair of ballet flats with this outfit, however, I don't currently own any, as the ones I ordered online when I was planning the photo shoot for this costume actually went missing in the post. Because of that, I actually ended up doing the photo shoot barefoot, which I've got to admit, was a relatively good choice, I think. It definitely worked out and looked very aesthetic. After all, she's a fairy, and in my mind, fairies don't need to have shoes. And of course, a great goal for the future when I do finally acquire some EVA foam is to make her fairy staff. However, that's going to be quite a large and complicated project, so definitely one for another day. And the final accessory, guys, is this crown that I got off AliExpress. It's coloured rose gold and is almost the exact same shape as the one she wears in the movie, adding a few small details like leaves and flowers and some extra hanging gems, whereas hers just has one central shiny piece. It's also incredibly comfortable to wear, and I have to say I feel like such a princess when it's on my head. And unfortunately, guys, that's all I've got for you today. Please remember to like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to stay up to date with all my current cosplay projects. Otherwise, guys, until next Wednesday, I hope you have a beautiful and gorgeous day. Bye!